Go ahead and call the hearing to order. Our special hearing titled Impacts of the Drought on Agriculture. And I don't have to tell you, you already know that California is entering its fifth year of drought, and it's caused so much damage to our local farms and our ranches, but also to the communities, and it's had other impacts that we're here to discuss today. In particular, farming has always had its challenges because it is so reliant on the weather and availability of water. But climate change, the low snowpack in the Sierras, and limited water resources are all challenges that must be overcome. This hearing today will provide an overview of the drought and discuss adaptive strategies to mitigate the impact of the drought on ag and our ag communities. And we've invited expert witnesses who will discuss current state programs, multiplier effects of the drought on schools and farm workers, and on-farm innovative strategies to improve water efficiency and use. Drought is certainly a critical issue for California and for much of the Pacific Northwest. So today I look forward to a robust discussion of all of these issues, and so that we can come up with possibly some ideas of some things that can be done to mitigate the impacts. So I appreciate you being here today. I appreciate your participation and your preparation. And there will be an opportunity during the public comment period for anybody that would like to make a presentation, but we would please ask that you sign in with the sergeants at the back of the room. With that, we will go ahead and begin. And with me today we have Assemblymember Henry Perea, who is the chair of the Agriculture Committee in the Assembly. Thank you for participating in this joint hearing with us. And would you like to say a few words?
No, I'm good. We'll get right into it.
Okay.
Thank
Okay,
you.
very good. Okay, I would like to invite our first panel to come forward. Our panel members include Jennifer Lester Moffitt, Deputy Secretary at the California Department of Food and Ag, Dr. Jay Lund, Director for the Center for Watershed Sciences at UC Davis. Thank you.
I like the drought-sized water.
Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Perea and Mrs. Galgiani, for inviting me here today. My name is Jenny Lester Moffitt, and I am Deputy Secretary for Policy at California Department of Food and Agriculture. Prior to my tenure at CDFA, I served as the Vice Chair for the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board, and I also was Managing Director at my family's Walnut Farm in Winters. So I'm very pleased to be here. To get to the crux of this discussion, drought is deeply impacting California's farmers and ranchers, and it very may well be, regardless of this winter's expected high rainfall and snowpack, that the drought is becoming and has already become the new normal here in California, and we need to better prepare ourselves and learn to adapt. There hasn't been an issue that has left this large of a ripple for farmers and ranchers in California as the drought. It has not only effects on employment and land management, but also science, technology, production, and ultimately the environment. It's important to note that these impacts have most strongly been felt by our local and regional communities. Communities that are some already most hard hit by other aspects, and we'll hear from those communities in the panel next, and I look forward to hearing their stories, and I'm sure they can tell a much better story than I can. Surface water and groundwater shortages have left producers to shift their crop contracts, to change their plantings, and to fallow land. Local communities in the Sacramento and San Joaquin valleys have been especially hard hit with high land fallowing and job losses. Dr. Lund here with me today with UC Davis will present on the university finding, but in essence, drought losses this year have projected to result about 30% increase in unemployment at about over $10,000 job losses over last year, and then also 20% more farmland idled than last year at 540,000 acres. This has resulted in the direct cost to agriculture at $1.84 billion just in 2015. particularly with respect to dead and dying trees. In a letter to USDA, Secretary Tom Vilsack, Governor Brown noted that the current period is the worst epidemic in tree mortality in modern California history. There's estimates that nearly 30 million trees across the state have been lost as a result of drought and following wildfires. Trees are especially vulnerable to devastation during the drought, since a lack of water can make them susceptible to insects and diseases. And in effect, some of our most economically valuable crops, like fruit and nut trees, are at risk. Livestock producers alike have also experienced losses due to feed shortages and irrigated pasture lands. And in spite of all of this, some counties have resulted in record crop yield. In total, last year, California farm production topped $54 billion, leading the nation. We also lead the nation in the production of almost 80 commodities that are the sole producer of 14 commodities in California, including walnuts, which my family grows, and other products such as almonds and raisins. California's agricultural exports totaled $21 billion in 2013, representing 15% of the nation's total. What those figures show is that farmers and ranchers are adapting. So they are adapting to remain sustainable while producing with access to fewer natural resources and responding to greater demand. Looking ahead, California will need to take its position as a world food leader to maintain it and to find a way to build on it while utilizing fewer natural resources. One way in which we can achieve this is through water conservation. According to Department of Water Resources, over the last roughly 50 years, the total applied water to crops has reduced by 8%, and efficiency has increased by 96.6%. That is a reduction of water to crops from 31.2 million acre-feet to 29.6 million acre-feet in the past approximately 50 years. California farmers are looking for ways in which they can remain competitive with new systems and management systems. And while our success to date has been laudable, there is still room to do more. I look forward to hearing today from Dr. Zoldowski with Fresno State as they are working to advance irrigation technology. Farmers lost nearly 35% of surface water supply this year, and much of that has been made up with groundwater pumping. And while that provides a short-term solution, we are all aware that that is a price to pay, as is demonstrated by the recent NASA report on subsidence. It shows that land in the San Joaquin Valley is sinking faster than ever before, nearly 2 inches per month in some places. As groundwater levels are reaching record lows, up to 100 feet lower than previous records, one report showed that land near in Kings County sank 13 inches in just 8 months. This makes it clear that while the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act signed last year by the governor sets to control some groundwater, there's still much more work to be done. The level of groundwater pumping is clearly not sustainable, and as more private drinking water wells dry up, there will be additional pressure on land use decisions. The well permitting process and ultimately potential limits on groundwater pumping even before SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act process, unfolds. There's an active discussion about making sure that SGMA performs effectively for the locals, and we at CDFA are encouraged by the participation. Yet as we gear up for an expected wet winter, there are opportunities. I know Dr. Mountjoy today will highlight some of those in his presentation. As farmers and ranchers in California employ new practices to promote sustainability and conservationism, CDFA has also begun implementing programs. We are working together with our ongoing preparations for drought, and we are pleased to serve on the Governor's Drought Task Force. The Drought Task Force is working to provide protection for California's communities, infrastructure, and resources against immediate drought impacts. Even as the drought persists, the Drought Task Force, led by Office of Emergency Services, prepares for possible winter storm impacts from El Nino, including floods, and in addition to continued dry conditions for next year. In addition to assistance programs, outreach and coordination with the federal government and local jurisdiction, the Drought Task Force has also conducted regional meetings in many communities around the state. CDFA also serves on the Governor's Climate Action Team to assess the environmental issues driven by climate-related events like drought, which include reduced water supplies, increased plant heat stress, and increased influx of invasive species. Beyond our work on interagency efforts, CDFA has also developed our State Water Efficiency and Enhancement Program. This program provides for financial incentives to growers to put in place water distribution and irrigation systems that both reduce greenhouse gases and save water. These systems include things like soil moisture monitoring, micro-irrigation or drip systems, and switching to the use of low-pressure irrigation systems to reduce on-farm water use and energy. The State Water Efficiency and Enhancement Program, otherwise known as SWEEP, was originally allocated $10 million as part of emergency drought funding in March of 2014. For that initial round of applications, the program received a total of 451 applications, totaling $33.3 million in requested funds. We ultimately funded 133 projects. Through the Budget Act of 2015, CDFA received an additional $10 million and awarded to date 100 projects totaling $14.6 million with matching funds provided. I would like to point out these incentives are important in moving growers in the right direction to water efficiency and savings. The number of applications clearly indicates how popular this program is and how interested growers are in employing these systems. The program has been habitually oversubscribed by 300%. More recently, because of SWEEP's demonstrated success later this year in the legislative session, CDFA received an additional allocation of $40 million. During this month, CDFA will hold 4 workshops and 1 webinar throughout the state on the next round of SWEEP competitive grants. These dates and times are noted in your handout, and we would love to have you or your staff participate in them. We look forward to continuing to provide financial assistance to implement these systems that save water on California's agricultural operations. Beyond SWEEP, CDFA is also interested in the role that soil health plays in drought adaptation and resiliency. As the nation's leading agricultural production state in terms of both value and crop diversity, it is undeniable that our soils are the fundamental medium for crop production. In recognition of the United Nations and the legislature's proclamation of the 2015 International Year of the Soils, the 2015-2016 proposed budget, and the governor's recognized importance of soil health through the development of the Healthy Soils Initiative, they've noted that long-term climate change resiliency, healthy soils are responsible for numerous benefits, including increased water holding capacity, increased crop yields, and decreased sediment and erosion, just to name a few. In your packet, there's also a handout with more information on the Healthy Soils Initiative. While the CDFA's Healthy Soils Initiative has not yet been funded, the draft investment plan highlights the importance of this initiative that CDFA has identified and several actions that are consistent with this initiative that will ultimately increase soil health and have added benefits for farmers and ranchers and opportunities to adapt to drought conditions. We will continue to engage in drought efforts and hope our programs will continue to be effective in helping the agricultural community thrive. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And next we have Jay Lund, Director of the Center for Watershed Sciences at UC Davis.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm just going to, you have a set of PowerPoint slides in front of you, I think, that have most of the charts and things. I'm going to review our report that we came out with in August of this year on economic analysis of 2015 drought for California agriculture. So hopefully you all have the notes in front of you. This work was done, was funded by CDFA, similar to a report funded by CDFA and the UC system the year before. It was done by a collection of agricultural economists, engineers from different organizations in the UC system. The second slide, second page, is Sacramento Valley precipitation during 2015 and a few other years. Everybody has their own water year, own kind of annual cycle. In the water field, we have a water year that starts October 1st. runs through end of September. And you can see here the cumulative precipitation in the northern part of the Sacramento Valley during each various types of years, including last year and the year before, and then the driest years of record. You'll notice that in the driest years, there may be 3 or 4 steps as each storm contributes water to the system. And in the very wet years, we have maybe another half dozen storms. So the big difference between a wet year and a dry year in California is only about a handful of storms and the size of those individual storms. So I think that's something to just sober us up a little bit about how easy it is to have a dry year here. 2014 was the 8th driest year of record. In some ways, this drought has been record-setting. In other ways, it's been fairly typical. In 2014 was also the 4th driest year in terms of runoff from the Sacramento Valley. So how do you have the 8th driest year of precipitation and the 4th driest year of runoff? Well, it's been a very warm drought, and that explains how we've had so little snowpack. So we had a lot more evaporation off of the watersheds, leaving less water coming out the bottom end of the watershed available for farmers, even though we had only the 8th driest year in terms of precipitation. Go to the next slide, a little bit on the methods that we used in our analysis for 2014 and 2015. 2015 was a bit more extensive. We collected data from 72 different irrigation districts, irrigation suppliers, water suppliers throughout the Central Valley and around the state. We estimated their maximum pumping capacities, and then we have a very large computer model called SWAP, Statewide Agricultural Production Model, that looks at the economic value of agriculture produced and different crops produced all over the state based on water supplies. We work in the groundwater with a very nice model that the Department of Water Resources has been developing, C2VSIM, and they cooperated quite a lot in helping us do this work. And then we estimated the employment and macroeconomic impacts with a model called IMPLAN. So we're basically using these computer models to assimilate the data that's available and interpolate and extrapolate from that in a reasonable way. So some of the results from that, go to the next page, page 4. You can see the shortage of surface water. Basically, we lost about 9 million acre-foot of what would normally be surface water deliveries to agriculture this last year. Of that, it was almost all in the Central Valley, particularly as you move further south into the Tulare Basin. The coastal systems were much less affected. The groundwater pumping increased by about 6 million acre-feet, so about 70% more groundwater pumping. If you look at the impacts of the drought, the biggest, most effective response statewide was pump more groundwater. And that's certainly what they did out of winters, leaving about 2.7 million acre-foot of shortage. That's equivalent to almost 3 full Folsom reservoirs, if you want to get that image in your head. It's about more than 10 times the storage in Folsom now, actually. Folsom's pretty empty right now. The next slide, page 5, is really the main event here. The top line is the shortage impact of the drought to agriculture. We lost about 8.7 million acre-foot. It's about a third of the water supply. Pumping and groundwater increased tremendously to make up for about 70% of that loss. So about 70% of the response to drought is groundwater pumping. And in a 4th year of a drought, that's what we will always see in California. Groundwater is the big source of storage and always will be when it comes to long droughts. That left a fair shortage remaining, 2.7 million acre-foot. Ended up following about 500,000 acres, or about 6% of the agricultural land. So even there, you can see we lose a third of the water supply, but we followed only 10% of the land. Or 6% of the land, excuse me. Because of that groundwater pumping mostly. We had economic losses, direct losses to crop revenue of about $900 million, about $350 million to dairy and livestock. Notice the percentages there, it's on the order of 3%. So how is that? Well, farmers are pretty smart. if they only have a little bit of water, they're going to put it towards their most valuable crops. They're going to follow the least valuable crops on the least productive soils. So between some fairly smart water managers at the project level, water supply delivery level, and at the farm level, we really reduced this 33% loss of water down to a 3% loss in revenues, direct revenues. However, we had to pay for all that groundwater pumping. That's almost $600 million of additional cost for, that's quite a lot. It's not cheap, but it's better than going out of business.
Right.
So we have a net loss of net revenue of about 4%. And we had 10,000 direct jobs lost, on the order of 5% of agricultural employment. So I have sort of a mixed view of this drought. Given how bad it is, we're doing pretty well. So I guess I will put that spin on it. It also points out areas where we need to really pay attention, but it's amazing. I don't think any other agricultural system in the country would have done this well with this much of a loss of water. I think we should be pretty proud of that in a sense.
I think so. But I think the concern, of course, is that we can't sustain this year over year because
That's right. The
Can't count
groundwater
on
is
the
very
groundwater.
important, and that's why I think the groundwater legislation last year was tremendously important. Let me go through the impacts just a little bit more, and then I'll have a slide at the end about how much groundwater we have left. So you can see on the next slide, slide 6, where different crops were followed, acres were reduced in different crops in different regions. You can see it's mostly in Central Valley and particularly in the Tulare Basin, and that it's biased to follow the lower value crops. If you go to the next slide, page 7, you'll see the revenue losses from those crops, and you'll see the order sort of changes. You might lose just a few acres of orchards and vines, but they have a disproportionate economic impact, illustrating why farmers are loath to follow those. The employment, agricultural employment in 2014, we did a long analysis of that because when we looked in the employment statistics, we found that the agricultural employment in 2014 actually increased despite the drought. So some folks were saying, well, you had an employment increase, so the drought had no impact. Well, that's obviously wrong. We still lost 7,000 to 10,000 jobs in 2014 due to the drought. But because of the shift in the structure of agriculture from annual crops to more profitable, higher employment permanent crops, we had a growth in the overall employment still. We certainly lost a lot of jobs because we fallowed 400,000 acres last year and 500,000 or so acres this year. So clearly the drought isn't the only important thing that's happening with California agriculture. And I think this points to some of the challenges we're going to have for water management and drought management in the future. Today, about a third of California's irrigated agriculture is in permanent crops, orchards and vines. If you follow that during a drought, you have a tremendous loss of capital. And again, that comes back to the importance of sustaining that groundwater to keep those high job, high revenue crops going in the rural areas during droughts. The next slide, slide 9, sort of illustrates this. We plotted here the cumulative acres in California, irrigated acres in California by the number of jobs and the total revenue. And you'll see that about half of the crops are responsible for 80 to 90% of the revenues and employment, which from a drought management perspective gives us a lot of robustness. It hurts when we have to follow these crops. Certainly there are real people that really lose their jobs and the real communities are affected, but we can safeguard the most important things, at least so far in these droughts. And I think for the next few years, even if it remains as bad as it has been the last 2 years. Fortunately, I always try to add onto this, in the urban sector, it's a very similar kind of a picture where we use about half of the water in the urban sector for landscape irrigation, which is a fairly low value use in the urban sector. We don't close the Silicon Valley chip factories as the first drought response. We've sort of deepened our analysis in terms of looking at satellite images of the following. You can see some estimates of cropland idling between 2011, which is a wet year, and 2014. You can see a special redness down in the Tulare and San Joaquin basins. So overall conclusions, the economy so far has been fairly robust with a severe drought. I mean, it's certainly hurt. I don't want to take away from that, but it could have been a lot worse. We should not be at the point of panic for the most part. Certainly will be individual farms and some individual communities where they need to be very, very concerned. But as an overall sector, it's responded in a very healthy way. Groundwater has been central in this. Markets following has helped, and then just absolutely amazing local water district, local farmer response to the drought in terms of doing smart things and coordinating with each other and buying and selling water to respond to this. We still have some major issues for the drought and continuing on. The drought does a really nice job of stress testing our water systems, and I think it's highlighted the problems we have in the Delta groundwater, where we've responded to nicely with the 2014 Sigma ecosystems and our ability to account for water and to coordinate things. Droughts and floods remind us to change and to help us, remind us to prepare for the next one. And then this figure here illustrates that we have really quite a lot of groundwater in storage in the Central Valley in particular. We projected out if this drought were to continue for another 2 years, and if it does continue for the next 2 years, the shallower wells start to go dry at an increasing rate. The pumping costs increase because you have to pump from deeper levels. And so you have a little bit more shortages, and it costs you a little bit more for groundwater pumping. It's a slowly increasing net cost to employment and to operations and losses, but it's not you fall off the edge of a cliff as a sector. Now, if you're an individual well owner, when your well goes dry, you individually fall off the edge of a cliff unless you can buy water from a neighbor. That's my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Given this situation, I mean, I represent a district where we've been hit by floods in the past, particularly in 1997, very bad floods up here in the Natomas area and then down in the South San Joaquin Valley. So I'm wondering if CDFA has been included in conversations with DWR and others so that if we do have the El Nino that we're hoping for this year, we would take the opportunity to capture some of that flood water and use that for groundwater recharge on some of our existing farm land. So has CDFA been included in those conversations?